Good afternoon. My name is Paul Elliot, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Axiom Mentor. We're very happy that you could join us today for this session on evaluating software vendors with some specific tips on what you should look for when attending a conference such as the upcoming Primer Conference. We are joined today by Carla Pauly, who is the Manager of Academic Research at Valleywise Health. Say hi, Carla. What we're going to do today is just sort of walk through our tips, and Carla will discuss some of those things or add input based on her experience in evaluating various software vendors and using different systems. At the end of the session, we will open the floor to questions. During the session, we're going to have the attendees muted, and that's just to avoid background noises and such as feedback and those types of things. So if you have an immediate question you'd like to ask, you can use the control panel for GoToWebinar. There is a chat function there. I'll monitor that and we can ask, but just know that we'll also open things up for discussion at the end of the session. So we will get underway. We've had the introductions. Very happy that you could all join us today. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Had a little problem with advancing the slide. So what we want to start out talking about is the key criteria for evaluation in a software program, and from our experience in terms of what seems to be valuable as people begin and wade into the process of evaluating vendors and features that are important to them. Let's see, I am having a little difficulty advancing the, oh, there we go. So the first thing that's really important is, of course, that the program be easy to configure to your particular workflow and your particular documents. Every IRB works a little differently, and so being able to accommodate your process will eliminate a lot of the startup headaches that you might otherwise encounter if people have to learn new workflows at the same time they're learning a new software system. You might have some challenges with your startup process. Carla, you've actually got a really good example of this in terms of your experiences.
Yeah, I manage the IRB for a public healthcare system, which we have a teaching hospital, community healthcare centers around Phoenix, Arizona, and we do about 100 new studies a year, and we'll have about 200 to 300 active studies at any given time, and a lot of them are resident or student projects. And our IRB just went paperless in June of 2017. But we initially had a lot of problems and frustrations with the system that we picked, and we suffered with it for a year, and then we switched to Axiom Mentor in 2018. So figuring out which system to go with was difficult because we didn't really know what to expect. We weren't sure what the day-to-day operations would look like as paperless because we were paper, and we couldn't visualize how different it would be really from our paper process. And we picked the wrong system, so hopefully someone listening can learn from our mistakes. So the first thing that just shocked us was that the system that we picked couldn't be set to our time zone. We just assumed that any computerized system could be set for our time zone, but yeah, that was a shocker when we found out. After we finally just had everything into place, we're like, can you change the time zone there? And they said, oh, no, we can't. We're like, what, really? So yeah,
you know, we've got some folks on the call that are international, and so that becomes an even bigger issue. It probably becomes, you know, you could end up with the wrong date actually on a protocol stamp if you know, with that type of system. So yeah, so that's a really good example of something that you know, those sort of small things, but they tend to add up, right? The
forms, when we first went paperless, we wanted to make sure our researchers could easily adjust to the new system. So we wanted the questions on the applications to be as close as possible to our original application. And we kind of got that with our first system because all it was PDFs uploaded. It was our forms as a PDF. So it wasn't good for the reporting because it wasn't a smart form, is what the other company called it. And the smart forms were actually extra, a lot extra. So the cost it was too high for us. So what we had was just uploading PDFs, which is not much different than our paper system.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about some of those, trying to uncover some of those hidden costs a little later in the session, but they exist, and things like smart forms aren't very smart if you can't, if they're not in the system and you can't afford to use them. Another key criteria is just that the design of the system is logical, so that your different user groups can easily, intuitively access the information. And so, Carla, you had an issue with this originally.
Yeah, the first system that we used was organized really around each individual submission. Each submission had a different number, and each amendment had a different number. So it wasn't logical that the way Acxiom's set up, it's organized by studies. We couldn't even set the number to how we wanted it to be. The number was automatically assigned.
So just recalling that information for a PI or a reviewer could be really difficult, trying to wade into that. Approval letters are really an important item. If you're automating a system, you want to automate your approvals or your just notifications in general, right? Carla, tell us about your experience with that.
Well, we would pretty much have to type the approval letters just like we did on paper, because the approval letters wouldn't pull in the information because everything was PDF. But a logically designed system needs to pull everything that's in there onto the letter, and you don't have to retype it over and over, and you should be able to set your own templates and all that.
Yeah.
Like that.
Yeah. Yeah, those things. And then speaking of templates, it's critical that you can create your own templates for approval letters.
Yeah, because we wanted the approval letters to look much like they did before, so people they weren't shocked to see a completely different style of approval letters coming in.
Right. And reporting is just an incredibly important function of the system. If you can't get the information out that you need in a manner that helps you with decision making, then reporting isn't then the system isn't doing what it needs to do. So being able to run your own reports without asking the vendor is really important. And so that's just, you should ask a lot of questions around reporting, and this is one of them. Can you run your own reports? Because it's not always the case, as Carla knows, right?
Nope, it wasn't the case with the first system that we got. They had they had reports they would email to us at certain times, pre-configured reports. We could get them daily, weekly, or monthly for different things, but it was never exactly the report we needed right at the time we needed it, because we couldn't run our own reports.
Yeah. Not good. And then, being able to track. This is Carla. Do you want to talk about how? Why is this important?
Everybody wants some different sort of information, and you have all of it in your system, and you might be the only person in your hospital that has it. So it's really important to be able to track, for us, departments and PIs, and just track the information. Funded studies versus non-funded studies, all that is what people want to see for our reports. And with Axiom Mentor, it's set up to run reports. And at one point, we changed our mind and we wanted to add a data point to our protocol pages, and we were able to do that. I had to go back in the interim for the active studies, but I was able to do that within a day. And then we had a report that had a data point in it that we didn't even have before that. That's how changeable Axiom Mentor is.
Yeah, and you were able to do that on your own in configuring the system. Yeah, that's great. The other thing to ask, another key issue to evaluate and ask about when you're talking to vendors is just training and support. How much is there a charge for training and ongoing support? And really, training and support is there for when something goes wrong, right? How do you handle that? What happens when something goes wrong? And again, Carla, you've got some negative and some positive experience with this.
Yeah. I'm sure when you go to the conference and you ask the vendor about their training and support, they're going to say they have excellent training and support. They're going to say that. But ask the question, what happens when something doesn't work the way I want it to? Because the response we usually got with our old system was, our system doesn't do it that way. Here's a workaround. Or most of the time they'd say, thank you for your feedback. We'll consider it in our next upgrade. Too bad. We're not fixing that. But with Axiom Mentor, whatever we say, they say, oh, well, let's make that work.
Yeah. So support doesn't necessarily mean, you got an error message on a page. It means, I want to do things a different way. How can you help me accomplish that? I guess is one way of looking at it. So let's talk a little bit about just stakeholders and how, when those are the key criteria, but, how does this impact the people that you work with every day, the researchers, reviewers, and the administrators? So for the committee, ease of use is critical, and an IRB chair is going to want to make sure that the ramp-up period isn't too difficult, and the learning curve isn't too steep for the committee members. So ease of use is critical. And tell us how you measured that, Carla.
With our old system, the PIs especially were struggling because they're not in it every day. But it took 17 clicks and 43 keystrokes to review and sign a protocol, sign off.
You measured that?
I measured that with the old system because I was so frustrated with it. But then I asked the right question. Ask this question to the vendors at the conference and see. And maybe they won't even know how many. But with Axiom Mentor, it's 2 clicks. It's 4 if you want to actually look at the protocol. But yeah, so it's easy with Axiom Mentor. It's not easy with all systems. So if they can show you how many clicks and keystrokes for an investigator or chair to sign something, then to just sign off on something. Yeah.
So it's more than just the simple navigation. It's how long does it take you to navigate the whole system? That's interesting, and interesting that you counted all of them, those keystrokes. As far as
depends on their name.
yeah. As far as researchers, the system has to be intuitive, and if it's not, a lot of times you have a researcher that's just they're a single-time user of the system. We get this a lot with our university clients, where the researcher, the PI, is a student, maybe a PhD student, and they're just going to use the system one time. And so if the learning curve is really steep, they're going to invest a lot of time in learning a system that they're only using once, and they're trying to get things done under a pretty tight timeline. So the system really has to be intuitive. And I guess one of the questions to ask on that front is how many support requests do they get from new users or from researchers? Because a good system should be able to run that report and tell you that what they've got in a certain period of time. For instance, the 6 months or so. So, and the user setup process, I guess, is critical. You know, how does a user create their account and then start to get into the system? Do you have anything to add to that, Carla?
Yeah, when you're talking to a vendor, ask them to show you what the researcher's process looks like to set up. And it needs to be simple, intuitive. And you want to have your directions right there on the first screen they see. And anyway, it needs to be set up so that you can do it.
Yeah, and you know, with single sign-on, with integrations with an organization's system, you know, user accounts can be set up in advance and really easy to use, but that shouldn't cost you extra. That should just be a part of the system because it's critical to having an intuitive system. And then, you know, what does the researcher's view look like? Carla, when do you get a lot of questions from researchers in terms of setting up their system, or you know what they're looking at when they log in?
It's not usually setting up their profiles. That's pretty easy for them. They don't call about that, but just uploading a protocol or going through and knowing which button to click sometimes. But it's so much easier with Axiom because you can log in as that person, so you can see what they're seeing, and you can say, okay,
as an administrator.
Right over there. Yeah, I can log in and see their view. So that feature is a great feature to have. Yeah.
Yeah, I think when we consider view, you know, it's not necessarily the pretty colors and a lot of white space on a desktop and whirling dervishes that might fly across the screen. But it's having at your fingertips, your virtual fingertips, or at the click of a mouse button, the types of activities that you'll need to engage in, like uploading a file. And then there's the administrators, and this is you, Carla. So do you want to talk a little bit about you know, what's really important to you?
The automatic notifications are so great because it saves you so much time. That was the big time saver from going to paper to a system. But they have to work perfectly. You don't want to have automatic notifications going out when you don't want them to, and you want to be able to have them say exactly what you want and when they're sent and all that. And that Axiom is all set up like you can tell the system when you want the reminders to go out and things like that. With our old system, it would keep out sending the notifications for people to complete a continuing review even after they'd already submitted a continuing review, which is just so frustrating to the people. They're like, hey, didn't you get it? I got a notification about it again. So.
Yep. And I think that it's, you know, when it comes to those things, it's really important to note if they're configurable or customized. When talking to a vendor, if they're talking about customizing their system to your workflow, I think that is a red flag, because customization requires programmers and writing code and then maintaining that code for, you know, not just you, but they're doing it across all sorts of customers. But if a system is configurable, it means that that process already exists in the system. You have the ability as an administrator to turn it on or turn it off, or alter notifications in some way. And so everything is within your control, as opposed to having to go out and get the vendor to customize things for you. And then you touched on this earlier, Carla, in terms of, you know, something that's really critical to you. And I guess this involves helping, you know, being able to help your researchers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, not all systems can do that. Our old system couldn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're at a conference, and Carla, I'm going to let you talk about this slide, because as a customer looking at vendors, you know, what should you know? What should you be prepared to talk about going in? And these are Carla's bullet points.
Well,
as a salesperson, I might be offended by this, but I'm not, because I know Carla has a good heart, and but nevertheless, go ahead, Carla.
Well, I've talked to a lot of vendors at different conferences, and I know that's a big shock. They might not be honest, but I think they also might have people in the booth that might not really be knowledgeable enough about the important details of the system. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, if they're going to say they have great, they have great support, but you won't know until you talk to somebody really.
Yeah. 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 So, Carla, next point of Carla's.
Oh, I just remember that the company we originally went with had the biggest, fanciest booth a couple of years ago at Primer. So.
Yeah. It's hopefully a vendor has flash in and flash and splash in their system and not just at their booth at a conference.
Right.
And then I think this one at Axiom we think this is critical.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Especially if you're a smaller IRB, but I think any IRB, like, system doesn't have to be complex or expensive for sure. I think that's not going to be better for you.
Yeah. So when you're in the exhibit hall, what are some of the things to ask about? And price is it's usually when at Axiom we try to keep our pricing very transparent, but it's usually the first thing, among the first things that is asked of us, and I think that's altogether appropriate because this has to fit in your budget, and so I would ask for price up front. And as an organization, you should know what you know what your typical year looks like. How many protocols do you have? How many administrators do you need to use the system? And so ask about price and ask them to for references for a typical of an installation that's similar to yours. So let's say, for instance, you're a university and you've got 20,000 students and you do 500 protocols a year. Try to find a reference point, a reference customer that is very similar to you, because and then ask them how much you're paying, because if there's a big difference between the price quoted to you in the exhibit hall and a typical installation, then you know that there's a lot of extras in the system in terms of price that might be hidden to you. And then speaking of reference customers, this is really important. You should try to get reference customers that are both new and existing, because the new customers will give you a really good idea of what the setup process is like in implementation. It's real for them, and they can give you some input on that. And existing customers, they can give you some insights into how well the company responds to your requests. We talked about support. What is support like? And again, try to get comparable institution references. I like to offer references when I talk to potential clients. I like to offer references up front, really early in the process. I just did that today with a potential client, as a matter of fact. And the reason I do that is, one, we love to have potential clients talk to our existing clients. We think that works well in our favor. But perhaps more important to anybody evaluating a system, reference clients don't just have to give information about the system under consideration. They can be great sources of information, in terms of how they change their workflow, how you might want to consider your workflow. Those discussions that revolve around, well, I wish I'd known then what I know now, can really help you not just evaluate a single vendor, but determine how you might want to implement the system. So I would ask for reference customers early and often, and ask them questions beyond just about the vendor. Things to save from the exhibit hall, technical implementation questions, unless you happen to be a technical person there representing your organization. You know, those questions can be answered, and we like to answer the questions, but also provide documentation that can be sent on to the tech department, because tech departments, you know, they're all busy, and then they can read that on their own time. The one exception is single sign-on. You should ask about the ability to integrate with your organization's single sign-on system, and if there's an extra cost for that. There shouldn't be. That should just be part of the setup fee, the overall setup fee, or the initial process. But ask about single sign-on, and you might want to, if you're a city client for your training, you might want to ask about integration with city, and whether a vendor offers that, and if there's an additional cost for that setup. I know city has their own cost when somebody asks for their data to be exported. There's a one-time cost that city charges, but the vendor shouldn't charge extra for that. So easy homework for pre-meeting: seek out customers, and I guess this sort of leans towards my bias towards getting references early. You can find out a customer. You know, for us, if you Google Axiom Mentor IRB, it'll bring up our website. But then after that, you know, you'll see our clients that have our information embedded on their website. So you can easily find out who's using the system and reach out and contact them. Conference attendees, if you know in advance which booths you're going to attend, you might want to ask them for attendees that are clients of the system, and then you can have conversations right at the conference. And the person you're sitting next to prior to or after a session, you can ask them if they use an online system and what they found out, what they know. Customers are invaluable sources of information. Again, not just about the system, but about how an online IRB software platform can make your life easier. And finally, get costs. And the sticker price is not always the last price, right, Carla?
Right. And if you're like us, it's impossible to add to your yearly budget after it's done. We have to know how much money to budget for everything, and then you can't change it once you have it in your budget. So make sure you have the complete price. And with our old system, they charged extra for city, they charged extra for smartphones, they charged extra for the consent stamp and reporting. Yeah. Everything with an extra charge.
And I think that's why it's important to get reference customers that have a similar installation as you might. Again, if it's a clinical setting or a university setting, whatever it might be, try to get a reference customer or 2 or 3 or 4 that are similar to your organization, and ask them how much are you charged every year. And if there's a big difference between what you were told at the conference and how much they're charged, then that's a red flag, and that means that you need to do a lot more due diligence in terms of costs as opposed to just what you were given up front. So that's the end of our discussion. I am going to open up the floor for questions. So everybody is unmuted at this point unless you've muted yourself. Are there any questions for Carla or for me? All right, then. I want to thank everybody for joining. Thank you, Carla, for adding your insights. I'll look forward to seeing you at Primer. Axiom Mentor is at Primer. We're booth number 103, and we would love to have you stop by and say hello. We'd love to show you the system as best we can in a convention hall, but at least start a conversation about your organization and their needs for for IRB software. All right. Thanks again, Carla. Thanks to everybody. If you're going to Primer, safe travels. We look forward to seeing you there.
Great. Thanks.
Bye-bye.